Uh, so I have bad news for you. Like, I'm going to tell you today why all the great things you are doing across your teams, all the things that you've learned today and will learn tomorrow are not going to save you. Like, not a chance. Unless there is also something happening in the other part of the organization, then only simple on a team level. So that's basically what I have to share with you today. Those of you who are familiar with ACE conferences and who follow me, I'm speaking, like, besides of Monica and Andrea, I'm probably the only other person who is speaking on each and every of those. So those of you who have been there for a couple of years, you know that I always start with a story, so I'm not going to disappoint you this year either. So there will be a story, and it will be about a team, as always. This story, however, is sad. So there was a team. They started working in pretty chaotic environment. They were following sort of waterfallish patterns, so not a great place to start. However, they've had this leader that started introducing change. So they adopted some kind of agile and lean practices. They started improving. So over time, they got better and better and better. They become more productive, more efficient. And yes, this is a failure story. Like, where's the failure, you ask? So if you think about this team, it sounds they were doing a pretty good job. However, if you look throughout the whole organization, like, only this team was changing. They didn't get support. They didn't get much of support throughout the rest of our organization, which is a problem. Because when you think about it from a perspective of theory of constraints, so the work that Goldratt spent like years on. So you basically know that when you're focusing on optimizing just a single part of the system, and here our system is the whole organization, when you're focusing on optimizing the only small part of the system, and even if you do it in terms of every single parts, but you're not focusing on the whole, you're going to end up with pretty much sub-optimized team, like organization system. So improvements in this team, if not coordinated with the rest of the organization, may pretty much end up with making the other teams' life significantly worse. Stephen Parry puts it in kind of different words. That if you don't have the support the support on a higher level, if you don't look on the whole organization, the only thing you can achieve is just processing waste in a cheaper, neater, faster way. So basically, and arguably, the work that this team did over the course of some time made the situation of the whole organization even worse. Because, well, they were productive, but the question is what they were building, what they were producing. If the wrong decisions were made on the top, if the wrong decisions were made in terms of what kind of projects or products they are building, it wasn't helping at all. And finally, John Seddon, systems thinker, who says that if you are doing the wrong thing, if you know, like, the whole organization doesn't support you with kind of choosing the right bits of work, you're not going to learn. You're not going to learn across the organization because, like, you're just overloaded with the wrong bits of work. But you don't give your teams a chance to improve on their own either, because they are just busy doing the wrong thing. So the only thing they can do is they can focus on making the wrong thing a bit righter or a bit faster, but basically they don't learn. And in this very story, the missing bit was support from on portfolio level. So basically, this team has improved over time, but the problem was that they were forced to focus on the wrong things. They were building basically useless stuff. And the garbage in, garbage out principle is alive as ever. So this is something that Andrea told you today earlier, that if you're focusing only on processes, you're not focusing on the dream you live by, you're probably going to focus on the wrong things. So in this case, the problem was this higher level. And, well, I have a confession to make. I've been managing and leading multiple concurrent projects at the same time for more than 8 years already. And it sucks bad time. I mean, like the job you're supposed to do is basically making all those decisions, like whether we can start this project, or how we should react to this kind of emergency that just happened, where we can find people, to support us with this or that effort, and basically the tools we have to support all those very crucial decisions are that. Something I call Excel frenzy. So this overloaded, humongous Excel sheet that's supposed to deliver us every important bit of information. Except if you try to find out a meaningful bit of information here, it's like trying to find out a puppy in the jungle. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm a pervert. I love Excel. Like, it's just the wrong tool to support this kind of decisions. It's just the wrong tool to help us to make informed decisions on portfolio level, to make a decision whether we should start a project or how we should react to emergency. And if you have such a tool to inform those decisions, you eventually end up, like having your wild-ass guesses or gut feeling-driven decisions, and eventually you end up just trying to juggle too many projects, because it always seems like we can cope with one more project. It's small, just a few people. So eventually we are trying to juggle all those balls, and obviously on occasions one of them falls down. So we're trying to pick it up while juggling the rest. It's even harder, right? And who thinks that trying to juggle just too many projects comes for free? Anyone? Like multitasking for free. Anyone? Maybe someone has a boss that thinks like this. No one? Well, a few people. You should change the job, definitely. Because it doesn't come for free. Like this slide, if you follow my presentations, you've definitely seen this one, because I'm basically overusing it. Like, it's in my every presentation. Cost of context switching. Jerry Weinberg, the cost of starting each concurrent task cost us 20% of our task for context switching. So we basically, when we start every other task, we pay a tax of 20% of our time for context switching. But when we think about portfolio level, about different projects or different products, it's even worse than that. Because when you think about switching context from one development task to the other development task within the same general context, it's sort of easy. Like, same client, same team, same code base, same coding style, same people, everything is almost the same, except it's just a different piece of project. But when we are thinking about a different project, it's like different client, different team, different code base, different everything. Like, this kind of context switch is even more expensive. And there is also something called the Zeigarnik effect that kicks in. The Zeigarnik effect tells us that basically we as humans have this tendency to think about stuff that we left undone. So when I, as a developer, am pulled from one project to the other, and I haven't finished working on the first one, I have this tendency to think about the job I haven't finished. So I'm basically, even if I have this comfort that I can focus on a single thing, as a human, I have this tendency to think about the stuff I left undone. So I'm basically interrupting myself. And this is very aligned with the work that A.L. Ophir from Stanford University did on multitasking. Basically, one of his conclusions is that the cost of context switching is deeply rooted in ourselves, interrupting ourselves, thinking about work we are not doing right now. So if I have this important email that I have to send to one of my clients, and I do have, I keep thinking about it, even right now. Well, you don't expect me to switch now to my email inbox and write it down, yeah? But I still cannot help but keep thinking about it. It's kind of unfinished bit of work. I'm not doing that, but I'm still thinking about that. In fact, I'm even talking about that right now. Again, one of the slides that I'm reusing over and over again, time to market. Imagine the first scenario where we start one project, then we switch to the other, then we switch to the third, then we come back to the first, then we switch to the second, etc., etc., etc. Second scenario, we start another endeavor only when we finish the previous one. Not only the whole time of building stuff is shorter in the second scenario, but also look at the difference of time to market. When we finish the first project, when our users get the value, when we can start learning from feedback, from lessons learned from the first project. This is the difference. Another price we pay for heavy multitasking, especially on portfolio level, is the lower quality of our work. So again, Ofir and his work on multitasking. So they ran an experiment where they told people to do a very simple task like recognizing colors or sounds. And they compared how multitaskers and single taskers could accomplish those goals. So what they've learned is that people that they were trying to multitask were significantly worse, even for such simple tasks as recognizing red from green or sounds. So think what happens when we're trying to accomplish such complex or complicated goals as building a project. And then, of course, we have stress. I was working with one guy. Let's call him John. So you definitely don't know who he is. So John was working on this kind of internal project. He kind of liked it. So he was building alone a project that few people cared about, but he was happy with that. But then the company started this huge investment project. So everyone who could be pulled to this new project was obviously pulled there. So one of them was John. So he left some bits and pieces unfinished in his previous project, but started this new cool thing, which was an investment project. Unfortunately, a couple of weeks later, there were a few bugs in his previous project, so he came back to fix them. Then he thought that he would go back to this new investment cool project, but his team pulled him to something else because they needed his help with something different. And then a few weeks passed, and John was like looking forward to finally come back to this new cool investment project, but unfortunately this emergency situation in a totally different place of the organization happened. So like all hands on board, on deck, and John, since he had no kind of fixed assignment, was pulled to deal with this emergency. Over the course of 2 months, John changed his project 5 times. Now think how happy he was, how motivated he was. We've had, during one of open spaces, we've had this discussion over people being motivated or unmotivated. Like, think how motivated could possibly John be? Like switching projects every couple of weeks or more frequently. So when you have just too many projects and you end up like pulling people from here to there, trying to cope with everything, you basically end up having people burned out. And when I think about all those problems, I cannot help but thinking that we already know the cure. We face a very, very similar problems when we are trying to solve, to improve our teams. We fight multitasking when we think about our developers doing different stuff on a team level, working within the same project. So my thinking is that Kanban is such a nice tool that can be applied on this higher level, on this project portfolio or product portfolio level, and should still yield pretty decent results. So this was basically thinking that stands behind me trying to introduce Kanban on portfolio level. And when you think about how would you approach this kind of goal, you probably have something like that in your minds. So using kind of very common, very simple approach to Kanban and applying, just changing the context. So instead of work items, user stories, features, what have you, you have projects or products. So every sticky note is kind of representing a product. Then we know which team does what, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I have another bad news for you, which is it doesn't work. It doesn't work because of one thing, and Jay has already mentioned it, like being 5 minutes into his talk, which is basically huge variability. When you are thinking about variability of projects, I find it pretty common that the smallest project an organization runs and the biggest project that the organization runs is kind of the difference in size 1 to 200, like 1 to 200. like no matter the org. So for example, the company where I first started playing with Portfolio Kanban, smallest project, single developer, a couple of months. Biggest project, 25 people working on the same thing for 18 months, like year and a half. Well, in fact, 2 years, more likely. Lunar Logic, where I work right now, smallest project, a pair of developers, couple of weeks. Biggest project, between 6 to 8 people, year and a half, and going. So if we try to translate this kind of variability to development work we typically do in our teams, we would be talking about differences between a task that we can accomplish in half a day and a task we can accomplish in half a year. Half a day and half a year. We're talking about this kind of variability. So this is why we cannot just use this naive, this simple Kanban implementation, because it causes two problems. First thing is that, like, given the size of our projects, like those medium to big projects, we would end up having a part of those stickies stand there, not moving for like a year or something. And if our board gets stalled, if nothing moves, we stop paying attention. If we stop paying attention, we stop updating it. If our board isn't up to date, we can either way throw it away because it doesn't help us anyway. And that's true no matter whether we are talking about portfolio Kanban, a team-level Kanban, or personal Kanban, or whatever else Kanban or task board you can think of. Like, if it's not up to date, just throw it away. And the second problem is even more serious, which is about WIP limits. So when we are talking about Kanban, we are definitely talking about WIP limits. So now, remembering that any of those sticky notes can be, just today, can need attention of 25 people, or just one of them. So you can exchange one of those for like a dozen of others. Like, think of a reasonable and meaningful number you would put somewhere there as a WIP limit. It's simply not possible. It's just not going to happen. Because on one nice day, we can finish this huge project and start a dozen of small ones. There are exceptions, though. And those exceptions are basically companies that usually build only a single product and are in a full control all over this product. Because then they can control how they break down the work. So they can break their product into kind of similarly sized things, like call them epics, minimal viable products, saga stories, which are supposedly bigger than epics, minimal marketable features, what have you. But then they are in full control over how the work is broken down, which means they are in control of variability of work. So in this scenario, they can use so-called two-tier board. So basically, the WIP limit is here. So you have swim lanes, and the number of swim lanes here, 4, means that you don't want to start those huge things, those epic-ish stories, and more than 4 at a time. And then internally, in each swim lane, you have an internal flow for those. But the problem is, I know very few organizations that have such comfort. I have very few organizations that can control variability of the work they start up to this point. So when you are thinking about Portfolio Kanban, you should be thinking about non-standard board designs, basically. And this is the idea I've had in a couple of companies. This is the end result of a set of experiments. So basically, what you see here is you see in columns you see basically a timeline. So each column here is month, but you can use weeks or any other kind of meaningful time period that works for you. In rows, you see teams. So a team is basically a unit of limiting WIP in this case. But you also can use individuals if your team is small enough. Because, well, if you're working with 20 people, you can use individuals here in rows. But if you're working with 150, well, not really feasible. So you are going to use teams. And anything that is inside is basically work that we do, any commitments we have, any value-adding stuff that we are going to build. So, like, Doesn't seem like a Kanban board, really, but I can argue, not a subject for this conversation, but I can argue that it's perfectly aligned with Kanban rules. So what you can see here, first thing, total capabilities. So how much work, like total work, we can chew at any given time. So basically, any of our teams can chew through some stuff, a project or a couple of them. We can also see different capabilities. So not every single team has the same capabilities as any other. So when we're thinking about teams, we cannot compare just like identical things. This team has specialists of this technology, that of different technology. This team has subject matter experts on this thing. The other has subject matter experts on the other thing. So we can show that here. It's usually obvious, but if we need to show them kind of visual, we can. Then we have free capabilities. This one is important, in fact. So any white space you see here is our capabilities to start something new. And look at how those capabilities are changing over time. Because if we are talking about portfolio level, we're not talking only about today and tomorrow and the next week. We should be looking further. Because usually when we start a new product or a new project, it takes time to do that. It's like projects don't hit us like overnight. There is usually kind of longer sales process. Then we have all sorts of commitments. So anything that's inside in this board is kind of commitment we've made to our customers. Then we have concurrent engagements. And this is something you should pay close attention to. Because these are basically places where you lose time and money and pay the cost of frustration of your people because you multitask too much. So the more concurrent engagements you have for a single team, there's probably more time and effort wasted on context switching. And even if you think about a team that is kind of split, like these guys are doing this and those guys are doing that, there's definitely some sort of coordination. And I'm yet to meet a team that can be isolated so much that those guys don't talk with the other part of the team. Then you can easily see the planned time span of any commitment you have. You see different types of work. So here in this example, yellow stickies represent kind of new projects, violet stickies represent maintenance work, and red stickies represent the work we are not going to be paid for. So in this example, it was a kind of fixed price project that went beyond the deadline. So basically, we still have to finish that, but obviously we didn't estimate that we are going to work longer on that. And by the way, estimation is evil in general. Then we have all sorts of future commitments. If we are committed to do some work, but it's not about to start just yet, but it's delayed, we can show that easily. We have all sorts of planned projects here on the board. So anything that is still inside sales funnel. So it's not yet committed. We haven't yet signed a contract. We haven't yet started a product, but we are talking about it. We can show that, and even better, we can show that in the context of remember about different capabilities of teams I told you about. Like we can show those projects in the context of specific teams. If a project P can be run only by team A, we can show that in the context of team A. Finally, we can show an availabilities that we expect. For example, summer months, we expect people to go for vacations. So total capabilities of a team are going to change throughout those months. So again, a simple way of showing that. Now, the task for you: show me all those bits of data here in this supposedly awesome Excel sheet. They are simply not there. It's just impossible task. Because here we have lots of numbers, more meaningful or less meaningful, but all those bits of information are somehow obscured by this supposedly great tool. So this is why when I think about portfolio Kanban or managing portfolio in general, I think visualization is kind of harvesting low-hanging fruits. Because having this single board, and the board I've just shown you is just a single whiteboard for a company that has like 150 people working on different projects. So having this kind of board delivers you information you don't have otherwise. deliver you information you usually don't have at all, and you're still supposed to make all those important decisions about whether we start a project or how we react to emergency. But what about WIP limits then? Like, I've shown like the problem with applying WIP limits as one of major issue with this naive approach to Portfolio Kanban. Well, let's start here with free capabilities. I've already told you that this bit is sort of important, right? So the white space is basically space we can use to work on something. So whenever we have an opportunity to start something new, we should be thinking in the context of our free capabilities. Like whether we can cope with new things, whether it fits those white space here, whether the teams that are available can cope with this project because of, I don't know, technology skills or because of subject matter experts they have. So this is one discussion we want to have. Then we see how our free capabilities are changing over time. So we see that like on the first month, we have very limited options. But as the time progresses, there are more and more of them. Of course, there are projects that we will start no matter what. And I don't pretend that, you know, like it's always an option to say, no, we are not going to start this biggest, most prestigious project in the history of the company for our biggest client. Like, usually there's no option to say no. But even then, when we cannot say no, we start a discussion, what's going to be the cost of that? So if we need 3 teams to start this super important project right now, we can start discussions what we are going to sacrifice to make it happen. What's not going to be done? What's going to be late? What's going to be canceled, if possible, right? So basically, you start all those discussions with the goal of limiting the number of balls you juggle, with the limiting of number of projects you run, or of products you run. So basically, this is something I call WIP limits by conversation. There's no explicit rule, no more than X, because it doesn't make sense in an environment where you deal with huge variability of size. But you start discussing. Like every single opportunity when you start a project, you start this discussion. And by the way, this is exactly the place where those awesome Excel sheets, comes handy. This is where I can kind of support my perversion to Excel. And I can use the data. Because then, we definitely need to know how much the project is going to cost us. Like, simply the board doesn't answer this question. What's going to be value for us, for the client, how we can split the work so we deliver this value kind of step by step and not on the end with a big bang release. So many of those bits of information are here in the tools we already use. And then when we just need to support our conversation, we use those tools in a different way. We don't try to analyze through all the rows. We just need specific bits of data. So what are the outcomes of introducing portfolio Kanban on portfolio level? So first thing, and it's very connected with WIP limits by conversation. First thing is kind of transition of metrics we use. For example, given 2 projects we can start, and capabilities to start only one of them, we start talking about measures like cost of delay. How much is it going to cost us if we start this one later? Because before you start talking in the context of limiting projects in progress, product in progress, you just don't even start, like thinking what's the cost of delay of projects because you start basically everything. So then you may want to start the project, which is less costly in terms of waiting. Like we can delay this one, but we cannot delay this one, so we are starting the other. Another outcome which is fewer ongoing projects. So basically, starting conversation whenever you start a new project means that you are cutting down all the unreasonable things. And I was surprised how easily it worked in an organization that used to work in this manner that whenever a very important person comes and says, start this, no one just asks a question, but they do start working. It was surprising how easy it was to kind of see all those unreasonable things that were just pet projects of CEO or CSO were suddenly cut down because it was enough to show them, we are busy with the stuff that we are going to be paid for. So we better don't start all those pet projects which are kind of vague, and we don't even know the expected value out of them. Then there is fewer emergencies. And it's kind of an interesting thing because, this is kind of positive reinforcing loop. Fewer projects you have, fewer balls you juggle. You drop one on not that frequently. And every single emergency you have is usually a source for the other one. Because you have this emergency, so you pull people from everywhere just to solve this emergency. So you understaff other projects, and eventually you end up having emergency right there. So you pull people from the other part of the organization, and you end up in a situation when you fight fire like all the time. Fewer projects, you don't generate such situations simply. Then you have healthier work environments. Like suddenly the story, remember this is the story of John? Suddenly you have fewer stories like that. Because you don't need, like every other day, you don't need to pull people from somewhere to help in this or that endeavor. Because, wow, what a surprise, there are fewer of them. And they're properly staffed. So there are fewer problems there. And finally, probably one of the best things, eventually you should end up with team-level slack time, which is basically creating this opportunity to learn for teams. Because eventually you will have this situation when either the only project you could start was just too huge to start it right now. So even though you have a part of the team that is not busy, you just don't have the right bit of work to fit this gap. So the teams are ending, having some sort of team-level slack time. And it's the perfect time for them to improve. Perfect time for them to learn. Perfect time to improve their process, where they have some time to kind of invest a few hours or a few days to rethink how they are working. The perfect time to let them help the others, but not telling them, just go there because there's fire. So take this bucket of water and go there. Just let them find how they can contribute for their organization in the best way they could possibly do. And when we are thinking about improvement, when we are thinking about the way we work, this higher level, this portfolio layer, is the problem we tend to ignore for many reasons. First, often we think it's not our area of influence. We won't help. We won't improve. Second, it's a status quo, and we don't want to fight the status quo. Third, it's hard. If the only thing we can possibly think of is this humongous Excel sheet, we are not even going to try because we are not even going to understand it. And Portfolio Kanban is kind of a tool that is a low-friction method to start changing that. It doesn't change the whole culture. It kind of, like Kanban everywhere, it kind of fits the current culture. So this is kind of aligned with what Monica just said on the previous session. So it doesn't change how you work. And it's even better. Unlike Kanban on a team level, Portfolio Kanban can be started by a single person. Lucky number one, Monica's lucky number one. It's enough people to start Portfolio Kanban. Why? Why don't you need this buy-in of every single one, or every single person that is working on PMO level? Well, because if you think about projects or products, they are not changing that rapidly. So it's enough to have a single person that is kind of updating the board. So it starts with simply visualization and just updating the board, gathering all the information, and you have this update kind of weekly, and you still get a lot of knowledge out of this visualization. And visualization is kind of easy, as long as you can get it right. And then people start seeing the value they get from this kind of board. So they start signing up for that. They start helping this first guy. They start using it. And suddenly you see things like teams coordinating with each other. So finally you don't need to react when emergency happens because the teams help each other. Then you have different conversations about the stuff you start. or the work you build. So eventually you get up to this WIP limits by conversation thing. And this is where the real change is. So you can use Portfolio Kanban as the way to start adjusting the culture that is in your organization on this portfolio level, even though you are not in power on PMO, at PMO level. And you definitely can use Portfolio Kanban as a weapon to disrupt status quo on portfolio level. So I totally encourage you to try it out. There is remember that this kind of I've just scratched the surface. There are lots of context that like every single organization has to take into consideration whenever you are thinking about trying such a tool. But it's surprisingly easy to start with that. Thank you very much.